This is the One Man Gang, and you're watching Wrestling with Regret.
Hey everyone, a couple of weeks ago I published a video on whether or not we'd ever see another Monday Night War. After talking about Impact Wrestling, Lucha Underground, Ring of Honor, and Global Force, a number of viewers fairly pointed out that I omitted New Japan Pro Wrestling from the conversation, so consider this video my response. Let me get this out of the way right now. Yes, New Japan is an excellent federation. The wrestling is very good, and they have the history that I've mentioned in the past is vital for competing against WWE. But I can think of a few big reasons as to why they shouldn't compete with them. In fact, I can think of 8. Number 8. Their current TV format isn't made for competition. New Japan does air on American television, though not going head-to-head with anything WWE has to offer. They currently run on the cable network Access TV. There's an English-speaking announce team doing commentary over Japanese matches that are at least several months old, broken up into hour-long episodes. While it makes for a good best of that helps showcase what New Japan has to offer, I don't think the show would be strong competition for any of the wrestling shows out there, since it's essentially a highlight show. I wish they would change the format a bit to add more of a sense of urgency and cohesion to the whole thing. On top of that, if they want to get more viewers, they have to be on a much bigger cable network. Number 7. WWE keeps taking their talent. This one's not New Japan's fault, but it's one big reason as to why they can't really compete right now. With people like AJ Styles and Nakamura and Anderson and Gallows and Finn Balor all having been signed by WWE, with 1 or 2 reportedly more on the way, it makes it very difficult for New Japan to have more established people on the roster. They can make stars from the ground up, they're very good at doing that, but without a consistent roster of established guys with rich histories, it could be very difficult to maintain an audience. Number 6. Japanese fans are different. If you've never heard a Japanese crowd, it can be a very strange experience. For the most part, it starts out very quiet, almost dead silent for the first few minutes of the match, before it eventually builds to a full roar at the conclusion. Now, in Japan, those first few minutes of silence are a sign of respect, but in America, a crowd that quiet is a sign of... I imagine the casual American viewer, the uninitiated, would have a negative reaction to those first few minutes. In American wrestling, a quiet crowd is a bad crowd, which often indicates a bad product. And since the average casual viewer doesn't usually know what good or bad wrestling is, that might just be enough for them to change the channel. Number 5. They have history, just not in America. New Japan Pro Wrestling has been around since 1972, far longer than any promotion in America not named NWA or WWE. Like I mentioned in my original video about competition, WCW had a built-in fan base because it was comprised of established American territories. The bulk of New Japan's fan base is in Japan, which doesn't really help American ratings one tiny bit. And in my opinion, you can only bring up the spirit of Antonio Inoki and Ricky Dozan so often before you tune out. Number 4. Sure, they can wrestle. And... New Japan has some of the best examples of strong style and technical wrestling you will ever see on this planet. If you love professional wrestling, you will love New Japan. If you're just a casual viewer dipping your toe into the water, maybe? The kind of stuff you see in New Japan is great, but in my opinion, it caters mostly to the hardcore wrestling fan. You know, the ones who don't care about storylines and characters, just care about the wrestling. The hardcore fans stick around no matter what. They're the reason Raw stays afloat every week. But we're talking about trying to gain a mass audience here, something with mass appeal. And history has shown that in America, wrestling being objectively good has little to do with wrestling being popular. Now NXT has proven that pure wrestling can draw in America these days, but aside from having the WWE machine behind them, there's one key difference between them and New Japan. Number 3. The language barrier. It's amazing to me how many American New Japan fans are willing to forgive this, but if the hypothetical goal is to compete with the biggest wrestling entity in America, then I would expect the stars to have a somewhat firm grasp on the nation's primary language. Obviously, there are a lot of gaijin stars in the company, and you can have English announcers, but the company is still called New Japan Pro Wrestling, and fans are going to want to see more of the homegrown stars. American viewers want to understand what the wrestlers are saying without the use of subtitles. But Brian, you might be asking, what about all those Japanese stars who got really big in America without having to speak English? And yes, there have been some limited exceptions throughout the course of wrestling history. Tajiri, Ultimo Dragon, Great Muta, just to name a few. But how big do these guys really get in America in the grand scheme of things? How much bigger could they have gotten if they spoke good English? And yes, they do have lingering, lasting followings, but how much of that is anything beyond the hardcore fans? Remember, we're comparing hardcore fans to casual viewers, which are two entirely different beasts. Number 2, Xenophobia. I hate to sound like a cynic, but I just don't think the casual American fan is going to latch on to New Japan, primarily because it's a Japanese show. I mean, think of it this way. Why did NBC take Sasuke and turn it into American Ninja Warrior? Why have AAA and CMLL not taken off in America despite a huge Hispanic population? Not even factoring any potential racism in all this, there are just so many cultural differences that might not translate well with the casual American viewer, unless the people who run New Japan make a whole bunch of changes that make it more palatable for those viewers on a much grander scale than anything they're already doing on Access. Which brings me to my final point. And the number one reason why New Japan shouldn't try to compete with WWE is Americanizing it would make it pointless. History has shown you can take popular foreign shows and import them onto American television by tweaking a few things here and there, but you can't apply that kind of modification to New Japan. If you change the location, or the way the crowd reacts, or the style of the wrestling, or the presentation, or if you try and anglicize the talent just so American audiences can digest it better, is it still New Japan Pro Wrestling? Plenty of foreign TV shows have been able to make the leap to America with little to no changes. Some recent examples include Orphan Black, Downton Abbey, Sherlock, The Office, all British shows, by the way, with English-speaking cast. And like I mentioned, the fact that most of the Japanese stars can't speak English is a huge hurdle for them. Look, I must reiterate, I enjoy New Japan. I subscribe to New Japan World and everything, okay? And I get why so many of my viewers would argue that New Japan could compete against WWE. But in my opinion, there are just too many issues, too many hurdles, too many cultural differences for them to succeed on prime time in America unless you take away all the things that make New Japan interesting and unique in the first place. And you know what? Maybe it's pointless to debate who could compete with who in wrestling anymore. Like so many of my viewers commented in the last video on this topic, the way we watch TV today is so different now than it was 16, 17 years ago. The ratings pie has gotten so much smaller. Can anyone get good ratings anymore at all? And would competition help or actually hurt the process? Maybe it's a good thing there's never going to be another Monday Night War. Do I think New Japan can do well in America? Yes, absolutely. Just not beyond the hardcore wrestling audience. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Be sure to thumbs up this video if you like it, subscribe to Wrestling with Regret, and buy the t-shirts at ProWrestlingTees.com. I'm Brian Zane, and I'll see you next time.